Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm doing a live stream about a special report on the highly pathogenic avian flu. I'm recording this on December 30th, 2024. Okay, this is episode 64. In episode 63, I went into detail about the Louisiana patient and the report that came from the CDC about the genomic analysis and what's positive about that report and what's negative about that report, all right? And what are some of the dangers, okay? So please watch that if you haven't already, all right? If you did watch it, it probably behooves you to watch it twice because there's some details in there that you need to pay attention to that will come to the fore, I think, in the middle of 2025, okay? So just pay attention to the things that I have to say. Before I start talking about the inoculations and the funding in the fourth cocktail, please help support my work by making sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. All the links are in the description of this video and all my videos. Please help support by doing a thumbs up, subscribing, sharing the links, and asking your social media to follow me, all right? It's kind of important, all right? So please help support the work that I do, all right? And I will navigate you through this crisis, all right? I know what to do, all right? But you just got to pay attention, you know? And sometimes I go off on a tangent, but you know, there's a reason for that. Sometimes you need a little bit more background information to fully understand what's going on here. Okay, so in the previous episode 63, I talked about HHS funding of $178 million to Moderna for further development of their mRNA-1018 platform. All right, that's the platform that they were working on, where they were developing an H5 and an N7. I'm sorry, an H5 and a H7 inoculation. All right. In this video, I might have to use some code words, so there isn't censorship with YouTube. So bear with me. All right, so there's a platform that they were developing before the grant that they received from HHS in July of 2024 of $178 million or so. They were developing a platform that was for H5 and H7. All right, and then the cases started to come in about highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 starts in April of 2024. There were a couple of cases, I think, in 2022, or maybe one case. But so the cases started to ramp up, and very slowly. And out of 66 cases, most of them, the far majority, are from exposure to cattle or poultry on a farm. There have been a couple cases where they had exposure to wild animals, wild birds. The Louisiana case was the worst, all right? And it had, when they did the genomic analysis, it had certain mutations that are problematic, that's moving towards the direction of human-human transmission. But we're not there yet. A lot of things have to happen. I go into detail in that video, episode 63. Now I want to go in detail about the inoculations. See, Moderna gets this funding from HHS in July of this year, off of a platform they've been working on way before that grant. They're in, according to their website, they're in clinical trials number 2. Okay. okay? The problem comes in is that's off of an older platform. Now, if they're plugging and playing a new sequence, they got to do retest, right? So if they got the funding in July, and let's say they could, whip things up for a clinical trial by the end of July, so they get the money at the beginning of July, and they start administering to patients for the clinical trial in early, in let's say late July, okay, early August, you still have to go through clinical trial 1, clinical trial 2, right? Clinical trial 3 to understand if it's safe and effective. What sequence are they using if something problematic just popped up in a Louisiana patient not too long ago, right? That's the D 1.1 sequence. Well, everyone was worried about the B 3.13 sequence variant, okay? What version are they putting in? What version are they using? So you had these doctors going on Face the Nation and CNN saying we need to have we have to give emergency authority, to speed this up, to just give emergency authority. It's like, well, wait a minute here. Slow down. Let's make sure that it's safe and effective. All right, let's just slow down and just focus on safe and effective. We don't have a problem right now. It's much different than what happened in the early days of 2020. In the early days of 2020, we didn't have a test. In the early days in 2020, there was not a very good understanding of how to treat, right? And, the medical community kept on tripping on itself, figuring out how to treat this. And, there's a lot, there wasn't a surveillance, there wasn't water surveillance or anything like that, right? And it was coming from overseas, and there was a lot of unknown, right? It's different. There's more known, there's more surveillance, there's water surveillance, there's monoclonal antibodies, there's antivirals that are known to work with these current sequences that they're finding with these patients, right? There are inoculation sequences that at least theoretically thought to work, all right? So we're closer to being able to handle something if there is an escape velocity with H5N1 than we did back in 2020, the 2020 crisis, all right? And pardon me the way I'm walking on eggshells because of the censorship on YouTube. All right, so with that, so we have the funding that's going to Moderna, and there is this concept of the fourth cocktail. Now, some people that have not been watching me, all right, what's the fourth cocktail? The fourth cocktail is a couple things. It can be in Barrick's lab, there was a development that was funded by the NIH to create inoculation vectors from beta coronaviruses, the SARS-CoV-2 platform, where it would have high affinity to the ACE2 receptor, but would code in its genome H protein or N protein. All right, but they were developing these vaccine vectors, and they were also developing vaccine vectors that would present to the cell proteins from influenza or from HIV. Okay, so they had two different vaccine vectors, one for HIV, and they had another one they were working on with influenza. So they had chimeras in the laboratory. So they had this vector that didn't replicate, but had packaged in influenza or HIV proteins. Not all of it. Not all of the HIV virus, not all of the influenza virus in these vaccine vectors. All right. What also they had or have is chimeras where you have viruses, SARS-CoV-2, that do replicate, that have pieces of influenza and pieces of HIV. All right, proteins, full proteins. All right. So you have the chimeras that can replicate, and you have these vaccine vectors that they were playing around with. It was Dr. Barrick and Dr. Sims with that research that was being funded by the NIH for the vaccine vectors. Okay. Why is the SARS-CoV-2 platform so important for a vaccine vector? High affinity to the ACE2 receptor, and it's administered through the respiratory system. All right, or it could be administered through intramuscular and still attached to ACE2 receptors. Okay, so that was the reason why that they were trying to develop that sort of platform. Right? There's a dual purpose though. There is the positiveness of trying to elicit an immune response to help with certain types of diseases, but it can be also used nefariously as a weapon system. Okay? Because the package for a beta coronavirus is so large. About 30,000 nucleotides. Okay? Now, to give you an understanding of that, HIV is like 10,000. Okay? All right, so you can package a lot in a beta coronavirus. And it's respiratory with a high affinity to certain receptors because of the gain of function. So that was the reason why it was so important to develop that. All right? So there is these chimeras that have been developed in the laboratory that are mixed with HIV and mixed with beta coronavirus, mixed with influenza and beta coronavirus. But the beta coronavirus is the basic shell and the basic mechanism of transmission. But it has code in it that codes for certain proteins from these different viruses, okay, that they were developing. So the fourth cocktail is the chimera that can replicate, that comes out of Barrick's lab, that has SARS-CoV-2 platform with influenza, with the H protein. They could put other things in there too, right? Other proteins from influenza or other proteins from anything, all right? But the H protein is there, all right? So what that would mean is that it can code for the H protein. Now, what I think was happening in the laboratory is that they were developing, because certain beta coronaviruses can present an H protein on the surface. SARS-CoV-2 doesn't, but other beta coronaviruses do. So I think what they were doing was they were developing a chimera, not only that has code for H protein from influenza in the beta coronavirus, in the SARS-CoV-2 platform, but also can present when the viron is packaged in the cell. It also presents the H protein on the surface. So you have the S protein and the H protein. So that means that you're hitting multiple receptors. Not only are you hitting the ACE2 receptor and the CD209, the 299, and the CD140, the CD147, right? But you're also hitting the H. Okay? So that means you can target more things. You can activate more things. And when you're in that cell where you're activating something and you're unloading the package that's in the viron, you are releasing something in the cell. Okay? There's a lot of things that you can do with it. You can use it as a weapon system. You can use it as an inoculation for a vaccine vector. You can also use it as gene therapy. Okay? And this type of research that was happening in Barrick's lab, right, was like just before success with lipid nanoparticles in the messenger RNA. Okay? So that's what was going on in Barrick's lab. So that's what I mean by the fourth cocktail, the chimera, that can replicate, that has code of influenza in the genome of SARS-CoV-2 platform that can present that code to a cell if infected, and highly probable that that H protein has been modified in such a way that it can present itself on the surface of the actual vira. Okay? So that's the fourth cocktail. Now, if you release it if you just release that out, it's leaked out accidentally or on purpose, right, and it gets out, then it's a problem, right? So that's what I mean by the release of the fourth cocktail. But you can also have something similar happen where, what if you use inoculations where you have SARS-CoV-2 floating around and it's mutating and it's finding its way around the world, right? And then there's cycles, and now it's endemic. And you get an inoculation of, let's say, for an H protein for influenza, either through just a normal influenza inoculation or maybe something special, like the one that Moderna's working on, the mRNA-1018 platform. Okay? And we know that you can't filter, right? We know a few things. We know that there can be genetic integration. Now, how does that genetic integration happen? It can happen two different ways. We know through the inoculation, the genetic integration can be the messenger RNA goes through a process where it gets reverse transcribed and integrated through human line 1. Okay, and some pro-inflammatory response that creates stress in the cell. And so that code can get integrated in to the genome. Now, once it's integrated in a genome and it's in an open reading frame, then if that open reading frame is activated, right, with a cofactor, right, then what will happen is that code for that message, that code that messenger RNA was going to be, will reestablish itself. It'll create more messenger RNA code and port itself into the cytoplasm and create all these proteins. Okay? So that's one way it can get integrated in. It's through the human line 1 pathway with pro-inflammatory response. And through human line 1, there is a reverse transcription, which was something that we didn't know about until relatively recently. All right? But this happens. All right? Reverse transcription is more common, and transposition is much more common in cells than we ever dreamed of. All right? All right, so we have that problem, but we also have the problem of when cells have plasmids put into them because inoculations aren't filtered properly. Plasmids are one of the ways to create a messenger RNA in a flask. All right, the plasmid has a promoter region, and it has an enzyme that promoter that enzyme attaches to that promoter region, right? And then now it's taking that code in the plasmid and making the messenger RNA, and it's making a lot of it because it's in a cell culture or a bacterium culture or whatever. And it's creating a lot of messenger RNAs. All right, and then you filter it out, right? You get rid of the cell culture, and you just you can tag these. There's different ways to filter, but one way is to tag the messenger RNA in a way where you can filter it out. All right. So a lot of the debris, a lot of the growth factors in the cells and stuff get filtered out, but not everything. And sometimes you get these plasmids, and all you need is a few, and you have this inoculation that has this messenger RNA that's wrapped up in a lipid nanoparticle. Let me go back one step. So they're filtering this messenger RNA, and they have some plasmids also in the solution, right? They got most of it out, most of the stuff that they want to get rid of out of solution, but they have some stuff that they just can't get rid of, all right? But in low concentration. And some of it is these plasmids. Some other stuff too. Some of it's benign, some of it's not benign, all right? So you have this messenger RNA that's tagged, right? And you can break the tag off, right? And wash it. And you can wrap it with a lipid nanoparticle. You know, there's a whole recipe on how to do that. And the larger the messenger RNA, the bigger PEG 2000 has to be. The bigger the lipid nanoparticle has to be. Small messenger RNA, smaller, easier to manage. Larger ones, a little bit harder to manage, okay? And it has to be, once it's wrapped, it has to be chilled, okay? But as it's wrapping, in the wrapping process, some things can break. The messenger RNA can break. Not all of the messenger RNA is fully wrapped, and some of it may be hanging out and break off. So in some lipid nanoparticles, you may not have any messenger RNA. In other lipid nanoparticles, you may have only a fragment of the messenger RNA. And in others, you may have all of it. And you may have a centerpiece, you may have the front part of the messenger RNA, you may have the back part of the messenger RNA, so the head or the tail, right? You could have the whole thing, maybe nothing. All right? And so there is a constellation of different wrappings of the lipid nanoparticle with the messenger RNA. Not all of them wrap the same way. Just like how a viron doesn't fully package correctly. Sometimes it gets exocytosed out of the cell with no code. Some of it with some code. Some of it with some cofactors that they may need. Some viruses have to have certain enzymes or certain proteins inside, including its code. And sometimes it has half of it. Sometimes it has all of it, right? Same thing that happens with virons in cells happens with the wrapping of the lipid nanoparticles. Same thing, all right? No one tells you this, but it happens. So that means that some lipid nanoparticles, even if it has a fraction of the code, can get into the cell and not really do much, right? There's some lipid nanoparticles that have nothing in it, and there's some that has the whole messenger RNA, okay? So let's just keep that in mind, that the manufacturing of this is not that great. It's in its rudimentary stage, all right? It's like, looking at car building back in 1901 or something, or 1910, all right? So you have all these different ways that the lipid nanoparticle can be packaged and put in the vial. But in the solution, there are reagents in there that sometimes shouldn't be there, okay? Such as plasmids. And this is where the whole SV40 plasmid package cassette has been found. It's right. So, but remember, what does that plasmid do? In the flask, it was to infect cells or bacterium culture that will help to code for the messenger RNA that is later filtered out, you know, it's tagged, filtered out, right? And, you know, wrapped with a lipid nanoparticle. But you have some reagents, some ingredients that are still in the solution, in the batch, that gets into the vial that's used for the inoculation. And in this case, you have maybe some that are poorly wrapped, but you also have some lipid nanoparticles that are poorly wrapped around the messenger RNA. But you also have these plasmids. Now, if the plasmid comes in, right, and like, you know, and you get inoculated and you get it into your cell, some cells may be getting the lipid nanoparticle that has a fully wrapped messenger RNA and it does its thing, right? But you may also get a plasmid in one of an adjacent cell. And that plasmid has code for that messenger RNA. Well, it will code in the cytoplasm, right? And create the messenger RNA. But that plasmid could also get into the nucleus, all right? And that could integrate. And if it gets integrated, then you're creating more messenger RNA, right? So, okay, so that's kind of that's kind of like a little bit of a backstory of how are these inoculations created? Does these platforms like Moderna and Pfizer, how do they create it, right? That's kind of like the broad brush. And what are some of the issues at the manufacturing level through the filtration process that can lead to problems downstream for a patient, okay? All right, so you have integration of the messenger RNA through human line 1, right? That can happen, but it's a little bit lower probability. And then you have also integration through plasmids. That's of a higher probability if it's in the cell, okay? Because that's what they do. So it gets integrated in, and if there's a promoter, if it's integrated and it's in an area where it's promoted, you know, it can be promoted, then it'll create more messenger RNA that's ported out to the cytoplasm and create more protein of whatever that plasmid is supposed to create. Okay, so what does this mean for the fourth cocktail? All right, like I said, there are these chimeras that were created in Barrick's lab. All right, but you can also potentially create chimeras in your body. All right, through swapping of genetic code. All right, recombination of genetic code. So you have an integration that takes place, let's say a vaccine vector for influenza that happens to have a plasmid or even a messenger RNA version. Because most people that have had inoculations for influenza have not had a messenger RNA version. All right, most people have not. All right, so, but what if just in the old, the old versions of vaccine development, there were plasmids. All right, let's say there's an integration that takes place. Let's say you don't even have, let's forget about the olden days. Let's just say now we're looking at messenger RNA inoculations from Pfizer or Moderna. And there's a plasmid that is integrated into your genome. Or the messenger RNA for that influenza inoculation gets integrated through human line 1. Okay, now it's in your genome. Okay, and it may be staying dormant, but let's just say it does get activated through some sort of stress, some sort of stress cofactor. Okay, and let's say SARS-CoV-2 in your area, the endemically starts to happen. There's a little bit of a spread or a breakout of SARS-CoV-2. People are getting SARS-CoV-2 even today. Hasn't gone away. but it's just at low frequency compared to what we were used to in the last 4 years. Okay, so you have someone that has been inoculated with has been inoculated for the H protein for influenza. Let's just say for H5, so the H protein for H5N1 through Moderna, let's just say, and there's an integration through human line 1 or through plasmid, right? But you have the integration. You get infected by SARS-CoV-2. There's a stress that happens in the cell or tissue. And what happens is that the virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is replicating. And this stress that is activating the is helping as a cofactor reads the integration from the H protein. So that these cofactors and the stress, it starts coding, creates a messenger RNA of the H protein, and it gets ported out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm, where there's lots of virons of SARS-CoV-2 replicating. And you have in a society, all right, you may have just a small percentage of people that have these integrations that also have an infection from SARS-CoV-2. But all you need is a few people, just a few, where there's enough viral load in the tissue and enough integration with the infected cells that's producing enough messenger RNA where you can have some viron package SARS-CoV-2 genome and have it with some sort of recombination of the code from the H protein. All right, this would be a rare event, but if you have a lot of people that have an integration, right, and you give them a response that activates it, some sort of stressor, some sort of cofactor that helps with reading, that helps with that open reading frame for the integration of the H protein, it's producing a lot of messenger RNA and putting it in the cytoplasm. And if you have enough of those messenger RNA in the cytoplasm with a load, a viral load that's replicating in the cytoplasm of a different virus, in this case SARS-CoV-2, then that means that you're increasing the probability of some sort of transpositioning or swapping, some sort of breakage, and then a recombination. So the SARS-CoV-2 genome breaks and the H protein inserts, and then it anneals. All right, so now you have a linear genome with an integration of H. Now, in some of these integrations, you're going to have where that H protein inserted itself in the middle of another important protein for SARS-CoV-2. The SARS-CoV-2 the SARS-CoV-2 viron packages itself and then it exports out. Because the protein was inserted into the H protein was inserted into an important region for the replication or the viability of that virus, of the viron, it'll die off. Okay? And let's say that's happening most of the time. But all you need is one rare event where the H protein comes in a region where it is next to, not in the middle, but next to an important region. And it anneals. Now you have a linear genome that has this recombination of the SARS-CoV-2 platform and the H protein. The viron is packaged, and it is exocytosed out of the cell and goes into another cell. And now, this one is the SARS-CoV-2 chimera with H protein from influenza that was packaged, it was recombined in your own cell. This is what I call stepwise. It gets out of the cell, goes into an adjacent cell, and infects. Now it's coding. Now it's coding for the SARS-CoV-2 proteins, and it's coding for the H protein. And if that code is designed in such a way, it may actually insert itself into the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 envelope. And now you have an S protein and an H protein on the surface. And it's packed, and it replicates its whole genome. And it has not just one, but it has 1,000. And all 1,000 of them exocytose out of the cell and spread. So now you can see in how a rare event, out of millions and millions of people that get inoculated, a rare event could institute the bundling up of a chimera internally. Okay? It's a rare event, but once it happens, it's no longer rare. It's common if it's viable in nature. For the example that I showed you, where if the integration of the H protein, the H code for the H protein is integrated into an important area for the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and it's packaged and it exocytoses out, it's not viable in the environment, and therefore dies out because it doesn't survive, right? Because it's not being able to code. That when it gets into the cell, it starts coding, but then it creates bad protein, and it no longer can work anymore and just dies out. That lineage dies out. But if you get that special sweet spot for integration, for that recombination, now you have a viable viron, and it will get into another cell and replicate and create other viable viron. Now, this is not crazy stuff, because this is how nature works, where we are symbiotic with viruses. Part of our evolutionary process has been through viral integration. Now, some of it's benign and just junk to our understanding. We think it's junk. It actually gave us a mutation that allowed us to be more viable in the environment. Now, the times where it wasn't viable in the environment, we die off, right? But when you look at the big picture of evolution, we have been swapping genomic information. Humans have been swapping genomic information with our information has been going into viruses and bacterium, and we've been getting back some of their genetic code through this integration, right? It's part of the evolutionary process. The point I'm making is that the fourth cocktail can come two different ways: a release from a lab on accident or on purpose, that a chimera was created, or the chimera can be created within us. Now, there's two main ways it can be created in us. It can be created through an inoculation with later a viral infection. It can be created by two viruses coming in to the same tissue at high viral load and leading to a recombination event. Okay? So this is not a realm of this is not in the realm of fantasy. This is how evolution works. All right? We are just starting to understand this swapping of code between different organisms. All right? So, okay, what does this mean? Why is there such a push to push for inoculations now? I go back to what I said in 2020. This has been all about biowarfare. We are preparing for some sort of biological offense or defense. And it's taking a series of things that need to take place to be able to build up some of our immunity towards that biological attack. Okay? There's a psychological component and there's a biological component to this. The psychological component to it is getting the population to think very similarly to the ones that are in the military. If you're in the military, you get inoculated by a lot of things, a lot. When my brother was in the service, this was in the 90s, so that was the whole Gulf War thing and all this, so they were really worried about chemical attack and all this stuff. So they gave the soldiers lots of different inoculations. All right? And they give it all at once. And some of the soldiers, and many of the soldiers, they feel ill afterwards, but then they recover, usually. There's a little bit of an injury from the inoculations for some of these soldiers, but usually after about a week or so, they feel much better, maybe after 10 days, all right? But there sometimes, 5 to 7 days, there's an illness that takes place, but they're pumped up with a lot of stuff all at once. All right? They're trying to inculcate the society to getting used to taking a regular inoculation once a year, twice a year, something like that, to be prepared for biological warfare. And there's the DoD component to it, the Department of Defense component to it, a Pentagon component to it, but there's also a money component. There's part of the military-industrial complex. They don't really care. I mean, just think about how they treat the soldiers during the 1950s with testing using tactical nukes on the battlefield. All right, and thinking this was the conventional thinking at the time, that you can radiate your soldiers at a low dose and build up immunity to radiation sickness. All right, that's the crazy stuff that the Pentagon thinks about. All right, so why do you think that they, people would say, well, aren't they, harming people by doing it? They don't care. They don't care. They can make money in doing it, and as long as there's some sort of survivability where you're beating the enemy. So if you have collateral damage of, let's say, 10 or 20%, with this strategy of regular inoculation, and let's say, that there is a collateral damage of 10 or 20%, versus not having a strategy and your enemy is using a chemical war, some biological or chemical warfare, and you may have a population reduction of, I don't know, 60%, 70%. So from the Pentagon's point of view, when you do the game theory, it's better to do this strategy. That's their thinking. I don't agree with it, but that's their thinking. That's the key here. We are dealing with people that are insane, that are running our Pentagon. Literally insane. They may be educated, but they are driving the world over a cliff. All right? So what are some of the things, if you step back, and what are some of the things that we heard in the news recently? Trump wins. Trump wants to restructure the national security state. We hear, we see a lot of drones in the air. There was this gigantic bill of 1,500 plus pages of pork and, additional emergency powers. Most of it was not passed. The national security state is concerned about the restructuring from the Trump administration, so they're pushing back. I'm concerned about a 9/11 kind of thing happening. Is part of this 9/11 thing that could possibly happen, could it be tactical nukes used in Europe? Could it be some sort of smaller version of an EMP with these drone attacks? Could it be some sort of 9/11 event that is some sort of a terrorist attack? Could it be biological? Could it be chemical? These are things this is not out of the realm of possibility, because if these things happen, then emergency powers will be given to the national security state. So this is why I keep on saying the Biopatriot Act is something to pay attention to when you hear doctors on CNN or Face the Nation saying, give emergency powers to Big Pharma for what's going on with bird flu. Well, wait a minute, why? We only have 66 cases. Oh, yeah, but it could get worse. That's their logic. But it's not so much the bird flu, even though it can be problematic, and I go into detail last video on why it can be problematic. It's not there yet, but it can be, and it most likely will be problematic in 2025. But I don't think it's going to be as bad as what we went through in 2020. There has to be a lot of and statements, a lot of mutations that take place, and ARDS for it to be that bad. Now, could it happen? Yeah, it could happen. Could the national security state force the issue by releasing certain things that kind of accelerate it? Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the things that could be accelerated. Well, if you do an inoculation, then you may, not only do you have the potentiality, low probability, but the potentiality of creating a chimera and then having it get to escape velocity of the fourth cocktail, or the national security state could not like what's going on and just release the fourth cocktail. Or what it could be is, don't release the fourth cocktail. Let's give money to Big Pharma. Let's get people used to just taking their yearly inoculation for the national security state. And either purposely or either being naive by inoculating the whole population with the same epitope for the H protein, the H5 protein, the same epitope, the same three-dimensional structure, right? Inoculating everybody for the same epitope. If you do that, then what's going to happen in mass? If in mass people start taking this inoculation, let's assume that no integration takes place, no inoculation injury takes place. Of course, these things do happen, but let's just say, for sake of argument, let's just say none of this is happening. None of the injury, inoculation injury, no integration, blah, 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 all right? But let's just say, in mass, the country or the world takes the same epitope for H5, it's the same problem that we had during the crisis in 2020, when they were forcing the same epitope around the world with the S1 and S2 subunit. No matter what you took, it was still the S1 and S2 subunit. That's the same epitope. That means that you are hurting the mutations as the virus is moving around the world, and you are coaching it for escape. You stop the escape by having different epitopes in different regions. And what happens is then it starts to die down quicker. And this is part of the reason why we had these different waves that was harmonic. Because what was happening is that everyone was on the same epitope, and there was selective pressure, Darwinian pressure, that led to mutations that would flare up and then die down again, and then flare up and then die down. But everyone was on the same epitope. When you try to fight viruses, right, because they mutate so fast, it's better to treat them with different types of things, different types of antivirals. If you only treat them with monotherapy, they escape. If you treat them with polytherapy, multiple ways of attack. So if one is mutating, it gets locked in by another therapy. It's harder for it to escape. Could it escape? Yes. But it's a lot harder if you do a tritherapy or a quad therapy than a monotherapy. So it's the same logic with the epitopes. If it's monoepitope, if everyone's on the same epitope, you're going to have escape. I've been saying this since 2020. I'm not the only one. But this is the problem with monotherapy and monoepitopes. You have to have polyepitopes if you want to really box in a pandemic. All right? So this is some of the concerns that I have of this issue here. So I think I kind of went into a good detail about why I'm concerned about fast tracking Moderna. They're only in clinical trials too. We don't even know what epitope to even use. It seems to be use D1.1 because that seems to be the best candidate for alpha 2/6 receptor. But if you get some sort of recombination of B313 and D1.1, then you're going to need a different epitope. And that would have to be tested all over again. So emergency provisions to Moderna, I think, can be very problematic. So I explained that issue, the testing. I explained how a chimera can be created internally. I also explained from the perspective of the Pentagon that injury is considered collateral damage. Because they're looking at, if we didn't do this as a provision for biological defense versus if we did, what's the delta? Okay? And that's their game theory. All right? They don't care individual people. They're looking at the aggregate. How many people survive and how many people die with option 1 versus option 2? It's that cold. It's that cold. It's that simple. So I think that in episode 63 and with episode 64, it's a good combo so you get a better idea of where we're at, at the end of the year with highly pathogenic avian flu. All right. Hopefully you've learned something. But the big takeaway here, don't fast track inoculations because it could be highly problematic, and I gave you multiple reasons why it could be problematic. All right, and we're not in a danger zone yet. All these different mutations have not mixed in the right way to allow for escape velocity where we have H5N1 human-to-human transmission with high R naught value. We don't have that, all right? We may never get that, but we're moving to the probability that it will happen. And if certain things align just right, you may have many people getting ARDS, but we're not there. So we're at that center point, okay? And I'll continue to do videos as things emerge, right? And hopefully it'll die down. But my gut feeling is that this is tracking where it's going to get closer and closer to human-to-human transmission. Most likely we're going to see a decent amount of cases, all right, in the summer. The reason being people are outside and, and there's just more wildlife activity and just more probability of mixing. And, we're moving to we're moving that probability of human-to-human transmission, around the second quarter, near the end of the second quarter of 2025. All right. Now, all those kinds of mutations have to take place where it leads to many patients getting ARDS, maybe all of those kind of mutations for that to take hold, maybe it straddles into 2026. Now, before I shut this thing down, I talked about the science of this, all right? But there's also a component that a lot of people don't talk about, the metaphysics of this. 2026 for America is dangerous, all right? It's, 2025 is dangerous because of the national security state and their worry with Trump coming in, all right? 2026 is dangerous metaphysically because there is a curse that's coming down on this planet, and it's going to start in September of 2026. And we're going to be judged on how we are right now, December 30th, 2024 to September 11th of 2026. If you're a good person, if you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to make the world a better place, maybe you stumble a little bit and, and you're not perfect. No one's perfect. But overall, you're a good person, you'll be okay. But if you are a person that demonizes, if you're a person that is negative to everybody, if you're a person that is more of a leech of energy and not a giver of energy, if you try to make the world a better place and more positive, you'll be okay. You'll get blessed. But there are an awful lot of people that are takers. There are a lot of people that are demonizing others. There's a lot of people out there that are egocentric. These people are going to have a rude awakening in 2026 that straddles into 2027. So we have this period of time. We're kind of lucky in a strange way. And it's interesting, this whole September 11th, 2026 kind of gets right into that whole midterm election cycle in the United States. We have this, politically, we are given a blessing to try to make the country go into the right, on the right path, economically, fiscally, spiritually, societal, go down that right path. We're given that like really sweet spot, right? Where everyone was very negative before the election. But after the election, there seems to be positivity. And there's even people that were anti-Trump pre-election are kind of moving towards the side, sort of moving towards the side of Trump. But we've been given a blessing that if we just stay the course and do the right thing, there's going to be a blessing. But if you look at what's going on social media, there's a lot of demonization that's taking place. There's demonization that's taking place within the MAGA movement. Some people that were very pro Elon and Vivek on trying to cut the spending on the Plan A bill with the 1,500 plus pages that they were trying to kill. They were all positive about Elon then. But when Elon starts talking about, we got a problem with, we need more skilled, highly skilled workers, then you had the MAGA movement going against Vivek and Elon, not wanting H-1B visas. Now, I personally think that there's enough highly skilled Americans that are citizens of the United States, working in the United States, that could be employed in these positions. I don't believe that we are short-handed on highly skilled individuals. What we're short-handed on are highly skilled individuals that are willing to work for less. And that is an inflationary problem, all right? So I think it's nuanced on what the problem really is. Is it about skilled workers? Because I think we have quite a few skilled workers. Or is it really more what they're willing to work for, all right? Now, you'll have these like rare birds like Elon where, they immigrate to the United States and they can do amazing things and create, huge companies and blah, blah, blah. That's rare though. Now, what I saw in automotive, right, was a lot of the high-paid American engineers were being supplanted by Indian expats, where they were paying like a half of or even a quarter of an American engineer's salary, right? So, and because of the way the dollar and the rupee was at the time, they could make that much money in the United States and send it back home, and they could have, I knew engineers, they were making huge homes. They made homes in India, out of concrete. They made huge homes with the money they were making, even though it was less than an American engineer. So really the issue is inflation. The issue is about inflation. The issue really isn't about skilled workers. Now, there is a piece that I think is legitimate to worry about, and that is there are some American workers that prefer bread and circus and not willing to work as hard as some of these expats. Some of these expats will work, 90, 80, 90-hour weeks, while other American workers, American peer workers may only want to work 50. So there's a problem there too. But there is this work-life balance thing. Should the company be forcing people to be doing that and all that? So it's a bigger conversation. It's not just, are they skilled? Are the skilled people willing to work for less? And are they willing to work as many hours? I think there's that larger conversation. But the point that I'm making is that the country, there's going to be a curse that comes onto the country in September It's actually September 11th of 2026. For the ones that are making stuff up and, and demonizing people, large groups, or demonizing individuals, there's going to be a huge, but this time period from now to then is like, you're given this extra chance to like rectify your behavior, rectify yourself, or be a better person, right? And if that does happen, then something good will happen. There's going to be many people that aren't going to be paying attention. And as things get, rough and tumble because of politics, as things get rough and tumble because of maybe another pathogen, or because of some sort of financial worry, because the market can't keep on going up and up and up. It has to come down sometime, right? And then, there has to be some correction. And when that does happen, people get laid off. And you have AI now to worry about, so there may be some sort of supplanting of jobs because of AI. It's a new environment. And when people are in a new environment, they get scared. And when people get scared, they do things, that, fall in the bucket of being mean. And when I think a big part of society is going to be tested between now and 2026, September 11th. Now, that's my take on it. That's the metaphysical part of this. So, all right, so you have the event that's taking place in 2026. Now, how does that parlay into this whole avian flu thing? I'm just asking a question. I don't have the answer to this. And sometimes when you just ask the question, it shows a lot of wisdom. What if? What if? Even though there's nefarious things going on with the national security state and HHS and Big Pharma and all this stuff, what if God is allowing this to happen because mankind doesn't deserve a good life? Can you honestly say to yourself that the world deserves blessing? Or do we deserve curse? Now, I think that the most honest person would say mankind doesn't deserve the blessings that it is seeing. Now, there are some societies that are impoverished and are in war, and they're going through a lot, right? And you have other societies like in the United States where, yes, we have crime in New York, but it's nothing like what's going on in a war-torn area of the world, or an area of the world where there's famine, right? There's other areas of the world that are far worse. But look at the way Americans are at times. Look at the way Europeans are at times. Does the world in the aggregate, if you add it up, all the people that are good, all the people that are bad, all the things that are going on in society, if you add it all up, is it, on a scale, good or bad? Which side of the scale is it on? Is it more bad? Is it more good? Is it equal? I doubt it being equal. I suspect it's on the bad side, all right? So maybe what we're seeing is a series of events that are taking place over a multi-decade arc. Maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 100 years. I don't know. But multi-year, multi-decade, maybe even multi-century. But over a many year arc where mankind is being tested, and it's getting worse and worse and worse until that birth pain. Maybe that birth pain's soon. I don't know. Maybe that birth is soon. I don't know. But there's a birth pain that's taking place, right? And some labor is really rough, and some labor is not so rough, right? And there's something happening where we're being told, rectify yourself, or more curse is going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. So, like the crazy stuff that happened in 2020. All right. Yeah, we know it was a release thing, and it was man-made and all this stuff. right? We know that there was emergency powers and the national security state was involved, and they wanted more power and erosion of the constitutional freedoms, which I call the Biopatriot Act. First one to say that. It was on Doug Hagman's show, back in the day in February, 2020, and how it all relates to 9/11, But the thing is that we're being tested, right? And we've had all these things that mankind has done wrong, but it's the mechanism of some of the bad things that are happening. That human mechanism is allowing it to happen. It's putting into fruition these bad events because of the way we think, the way we conduct ourselves in society. But God's allowing it to happen. It's like a curse. It's like a plague. The things that are happening in the world. And I don't know the answer. This is a metaphysical question. The things that are happening in the world, even though that some things are human made, is it because mankind is bad and doesn't deserve blessing, and that's why God is allowing it to happen? God allowed COVID to happen. Why? I think it's because mankind is doing things it shouldn't be doing. And it's going to get worse and worse because we're not learning from it. We're not learning from the mistakes. Now, there's a religious component to what I'm saying. There's a philosophical component to it. The mechanism is the science. But we don't have an answer on why. We can explain how, but we don't have the answer on why it's happening. I can explain how COVID happened. I can't explain why God allowed it. I suspect that mankind is going on a path of destruction that needs to rectify itself. So it's important to look at these things in different lenses. A metaphysical lens, a scientific lens, all these different modalities. And maybe we get to a better understanding of what's going on. So that's my long-winded explanation of bird flu. Is Dr. Paul Cottrell worried about bird flu? Survivability? No. But if there's a lot of fear and a lack of understanding of what the facts are and what the probabilities are of certain things happening in the future, then there's going to be panic. And the national security state does things, people get inoculated, and then there's pressure, mutation pressure, for escape velocity for the virus, because everyone's being inoculated at the same time for the same epitope. The same issue with COVID. It's the same problem. And I was talking about the whole epitope problem 3 years ago. So maybe even 4 years ago. But the point here is that we need to understand. We need to not just understand but appreciate there are probabilities. We need to understand and appreciate it is increasing. I'm not worried. I'm not like Alex Jones, the national security state is, this is all fake and the national security state is going to, lock down everybody. And no, it's not going to happen. One, Trump isn't going to allow it. The economy can't afford it. And, it's a lot different than what was happening in the early days of 2020 and in late 2019, right? It's a lot different. But if certain things happen, certain mutations take place, certain pathophysiologies start to manifest themselves, then you have a problem. But I'm not like in worry mode. I'm more worried about people doing stupid stuff, like panicking and getting an inoculation. But bird flu, I'm not worried about yet. Not yet. But I do have this sense that goes all the way back to 2020 that this is going to be a multi-year, multi-hit event. And it deals with the fourth and the fifth cocktail. That means SARS-CoV, and I said this 5 years ago. The fifth the fourth and fifth cocktail are later events that are tied to the event of 2020. And again, the fourth cocktail is influenza. The fifth cocktail is HIV. I've been saying that got to pay attention to HIV. Pay attention to HIV. Pay attention to HIV. I'm more worried about HIV than I am with influenza. All right, but you know, that's my long-winded conversation of the special, what did I call this? Special report on bird flu, HHS funding, and the fourth cocktail. Hopefully you learned something. I'm sure that the ones that have been following me for a while have heard, elements of this throughout the years. But this was specific to bird flu. I'm gonna, I've been talking because of this video and the last video for a while here, and I'm starting to get dry throat here. But please help support my work, all right? I can't plug any products on this video because I'd get medical misinformation by YouTube. Please help support my work by going to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and donate. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee. You can be a paid member to my Patreon channel. All these videos I'm doing to try to inform the public on how to manage their finances, to learn a little bit about economics and finance, to learn about the geopolitical environment that is emerging in the world. What's going on with your health and how to improve it, right? Thousands of videos for free. No paywall, nothing. But it's through the donations and the individuals that purchase stuff on my website that allows me to do this. Now, I guarantee you that I am the most comprehensive on how to handle the crisis. I am the most comprehensive on what's really going on. I am sure that no one that you listen to has given you the details that I gave to you in these two videos. Nobody. Not Alex Jones, not the celebrity docs, nobody. There's a unique perspective that I have that people need to listen to. You'll learn something, but not only that, I'll navigate you through this. In addition, share the links, ask your social media to follow me to help to get around the censorship. Click the, the thumbs up when you're, watching a video to help with the algorithms and all this. I'm shadow banned. I have subscribers that get bled every single time I do a video. So it's like whack-a-mole. I got to all these different channels, right? Subscribe to all the channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I would reach a larger audience if it wasn't for 2 channels getting nuked, right? But the thing is, I'm extremely accurate. I don't know anyone that's more accurate when it's dealing with this whole arc of, this pathogenic arc, all right? I appreciate you following me and bearing with me, today. Today I think I had a lot of people sending me messages that they had to hear my perspective on this. You know, I was originally going to be just quiet, right? Because I didn't think it was that big of a deal right now. Now, risks are elevating over time, and an event will take place most likely in 2025, mid 2025, most likely. But it's nothing to worry about right now, and it's not a foregone conclusion that something is going to happen. It's just elevated risks that are taking place. But if all these risks take place, if all these things happen, then we have a problem. Now, this is the reason why, 2 years ago, you know, I was on Mike Adams' show and I said, he asked me, you know, what's the next thing to worry about? And I said H5N1. Roll the tape, all right? It was the last show, I think it was the last show or the second from last show that I did with Mike. All right, Adams. You know, I'm pretty accurate on this, all right? You know, the show was more focused on cancer, turbinate cancers and stuff like that. But, you know, it was a side thing that we were talking about during the show. But the thing is that the main thrust of the argument, the main thrust of the show, the main reason I went on there was to inform people that are supposedly patriots, supposedly truth-seeking individuals, that you can't stop this unless you do two things. You have to shut down the national security state and its bioweapon development. 2, you gotta be a better person. And when both of those things happen, blessing will happen. But if both don't happen, guess what? Don't be surprised that there is some sort of pathogenic crisis that you have to manage through. Do you really want to go through? Do you really want to go through a 2020 again? Our economy can't take it. Your job couldn't take it. The average person's employment could not take it. Our government debt can't take it. Our immunological situation can't take it. Most people's immune system is trashed because of the crisis. It's going to take time to heal. And this is part of the reason why the turbo cancers are happening. But we didn't get to the root cause. This is why I'm saying that, you know, within groups there was infighting. And didn't get the job done. Just a lot of infighting. And there's more infighting. You know, like, for example, you know, I'm going to shortly shut this off, but just going on a tangent here, because it's my show and I can go on tangents. There's like these posts from Tim Pool. I don't watch Tim Pool at all. I find him annoying. But, you know, he's saying that he's going to announce something big. Well, you know, and I see people like talking about all this, you know. They're so worried, or not worried, but so consumed by what Tim Pool has to announce. Most likely he's going to be working with an organization. I don't know. I don't really care. And then people, you know, want to know what's underneath his cap. You know, most likely he's bald. All right? Like Edge from, you know, from YouTube, right? But it doesn't matter. It's not a major priority. I mean, if it wasn't for just a passing feed in X, I would not know anything about what's going on in Tim Pool's life. Because I don't care. My life is more interesting. I enjoy other things than knowing what Tim Pool is doing. The bigger issue is you have all these people infighting. They're supposedly on the same team, but they're not. And because of that, and because of the demonization of people, all right, a large percentage of the population is going to be cursed. Now, what that curse is, I don't know. I'm not God. Newsflash, DrPaulCottrell is not God. But I have a sense that the way way people are handling themselves in social media is not very proper. And it's called, I call it the infestation. It's like all these bugs, you know, it's just like it's an infestation. Meanwhile, the national security state wants you infighting. The national security state is trying to figure out a way, as you're infighting, to take away your civil liberties. Didn't get to the root cause. Didn't shut down. People have been warning. People very intelligent have been warning you. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only intelligent individual saying this. You didn't listen. People in general did not get to the root cause. And because you don't get to the root cause of a problem, the problem doesn't go away. With that, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully, if you haven't, make sure you watch episode 63. It goes into detail. You might have to watch it twice. That's my take on bird flu. I'm not concerned right now, but elevated risks because of the Louisiana case. Probability is that it's going to get worse by mid-2025, may even straddle into 2026. But I don't think that it's going to be as bad as what we saw in 2020. I don't think that. I don't think we'll see anything like that for the rest of our lives unless the fifth cocktail is released. But it can be problematic. It can be disruptive. You know, if you looked at this from a spectrum, 2020 crisis, the worst, you know, like a 10, and like, you know, a 0 is nothing's happening. And you remember like swine flu, right? Remember swine flu? Swine flu is like 4. Back in 2009, I think it was. All right. The crisis for H5N1 is probably a 7. So that's where I am with like a relative kind of gauge. It's going to be worse in swine flu, all right? But it's not going to be as bad as COVID, all right? COVID had some other dynamics that were going on. It was new, right? Immunologically. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to die through this H5N1 crisis that's going to emerge in 2020, or potentially emerge in 2025, right? People will die. Now, if you take a look at death rates of influenza in the United States, I think it's around, depending on the year, it fluctuates, you know, anywhere from 36 to 50,000, right? So let's just say, for easy estimation here, let's say 50,000 a year die from influenza, all right? Over a 20-month period, right, with COVID, you know, we hit the million mark, I think it was. I think we hit the million mark in the 20th month. I think that's maybe the 24th month, but in over a 2-year period, you know, about 1 million people. So now, if you know, look at, okay, normal influenza deaths of 50,000 a year, and let's just say, you know, that about 500,000 per year for during the crisis, the 2020 crisis, roughly. You know, it's not that evenly distributed because, you know, but I'm just trying to rough this out to show comparison here. So about 500,000 deaths in a year, and you have 50,000 deaths with normal influenza in a year. All right, so you have COVID, 500,000, 50,000 for regular influenza, right, in a bad year, right? All right, now you take a look at what's the possibility of what could happen with H5N1. I would say it's in about the 150, maybe 200,000 death range in 1 year. That's the kind of the severity. It's not as bad as SARS-CoV-2, but much worse than normal death rate for influenza. So we're looking at potentially 4 to 5 times worse. If all these things happen, all these things mutate. The replication complex mutates the right way, the truncation of the N protein, high affinity to the alpha 2/6 receptor for the H protein, and ARDS in many of the patients. If all those things happen, then yeah, it could be 4 to 5 times worse than the worst flu that in recent time. Is it going to be as bad as 1918 flu? No. Why? Better medicine, better healthcare. We have antivirals. There's a lot of things that we have now that they didn't have in 1918. Right? The thing we're missing that they had in 1918, in 1918 they had common sense. Now, common sense is not so common. So, with that, thank you for listening and have a nice day.